Pollock. He's entertained and informed us with podcasts, screencasts, and more over the last several years. He's a founder of Envy Labs, a consultancy based in sunny, warm, I'm sure, not that I'm jealous of Florida. And he'll be running through...
It's cold here, too.
Oh, it's cold there, too. That's surprising. So here he is. With that's a fantastic picture of Care Bears and My Little Ponies. And are those strawberry shortcakes on top?
Yeah, right. Yeah, pretty much. So as David Heinemeier Hansen said in the release notes, it's all ponies and rainbows. And I know O'Reilly said something about a hashtag at the beginning of this, but I thought I'd have my own, which is hashtag Rails3 oh my god ponies, exclamation point. So, if you like to talk, you can use that hashtag. But anyways, what I'm going to be showing you guys is some beautiful code. Rails 3 has a great deal of changes both on the external and internal APIs. And in this presentation, I'm going to stick strictly to the external API, stuff that most Rails developers are going to be dealing with on a daily basis, and sort of comparing the differences between 2 and 3. So sort of the layout looks like this. We're going to look through starting a new Rails app, the new Router API, ActionController Respond with, ActionMailer, AREL, escaping strings, and unobtrusive JavaScript. So let's just jump right into it. Okay, cool. So we're going to start our new Rails app. And so here we've got Rails. And so this is, I've already got Rails 3 installed. I'm using RVM, which makes it really nice because remember, you have to be using Ruby 1.8.7 or 1.9.2 recommended. So if we run this in our local command line, we're actually going to see a couple new options. We're going to see that we now have the ability when we create a new Rails app to skip active record files. We also have the new ability to go straight and skip our unit tests, for example, if we wanted to use our spec. We can set up our Rails instance to basically point at a local Rails checkout if we want. We can skip the prototype libraries if we want to just use jQuery or some other JavaScript library. We can also skip Git. You might be wondering, wait a second, skip Git? Well, it turns out that when you create a new Rails app now in Rails 3, it gives you a default .gitignore file, which has some intelligent defaults that go along there. It's a good place to get started. But of course, you can skip it if you don't want it. Next up, we can also point the gem file at Rails edge. So if we want to basically code against the edge, we can do that really easily by specifying that option. So let's say we go ahead and create our Rails app, and we go into our directory, and we look inside the scripts directory. What we're going to notice inside the scripts directory is that our scripts are missing. There's no more scripts there except for one, which is the Rails command. Now this Rails command you're not going to want to run directly, because you'll notice if you run the Rails command from inside your app, it actually goes to the script directory and runs that Rails command by default. So if we run Rails inside our app now, we're going to get a couple new commands. We got Rails generate to generate new code, just like script generate. There's a shortcut. We can use G, so just Rails G. We can do Rails console. We can do Rails server, or shortcut S, Rails DB console, or just Rails DB. And then we've got all the rest of the scripts functionality that we can also use by specifying the command. So just to summarize there, you've got script generate is now Rails G. We have Rails C, Rails S, and Rails DB. Now in my local service box, what I ended up doing is actually specifying an alias. This, of course, is completely optional. I'm not going to be using the R language anytime soon, so I aliased R to Rails. And what that made it is that much simpler to run all of my commands. So just RG, RC, RS, and RDB. Kind of nice. Cool. So the new Router API, we're going to jump through a lot of new code. I'm going to be showing you tons of code in this presentation. So if we took a look at our new application inside our routes file, we would see something a little bit different. We would be seeing that now our application has a namespace. So at the very beginning of that line, we have test app. Cool. You'll also notice that we have the map parameter. But what we realized once you start using the new router is that you don't have to use the map block parameter there. So instead of having this, we can now just take away that .map and just have resources posts. Reads a little bit easier. So if I have something like this in Rails 2, where I've got nested resources, in Rails 3, it's going to look a little cleaner, a little more readable. Now, if I took a look at an existing Rails 2 app, sometimes you start looking, sometimes the resources and the routes start looking a little sloppy. You have all these members and collections in there. With Rails 3, we have a slightly different syntax we can use for specifying member and collection routes. We can use these do blocks, which are kind of nice. Kind of self-explanatory. I don't really need to explain them. One thing you might notice, though, with resources comments here, where I've got a post preview and get archived, it might seem a little verbose for you to use a block for just a single route. Well, in that case, you can use a slightly different syntax. We can say post preview on member and get archived on collection. Pretty nice. Cool. Next up, we're going to take a look at custom routes. So in Rails 2, to do a custom route, I would go to, I'd say, map connect login. So I'm pointing at the session controller action new. With Rails 3, I'd simply do match login and then specify the controller in action in a single string like that. Yehuda showed this a little bit earlier. To do named routes, for instance, if I want my application to do login path, I simply do login. Well, for Rails 2, this is what I would do. So I do map.login. For Rails 3, I do match login session new as login. So that as login parameter is what gives us our named route. In Rails 2, to specify our route path, this is what we would use. In Rails 3, it just got a little bit simpler. We just say route to and user index. The legacy route in Rails 2, of course, looks something like this, right? And that would happen, it would print out at the bottom of your routes file by default. In Rails 3, we still have that legacy route, but it's commented out by default, which is nice. It's trying to encourage people to use more RESTful routes. Also, one thing you should notice about this, and that came over from MERB, is some really nice optional parameters where you see the parentheses being used here. Now, I don't have time to go through all the new options here. For more information, you'll notice that the Rails guide on routing has been updated recently, has lots of good sort of advanced information. There's some really cool stuff on pervasive blocks and arbitrary constraints for subdomains, if you are into that. So let's go ahead and move on. Now we're about a third of the way through. I'm going to jump onto respond with in ActionController. So here is a default controller. I'll wait till this gets up on your page. I think our computer here is a little lagged. Okay, there you go. So here's your default controller in Rails. Right? We have an index action and we have a show action. With Rails 3, you have an optional new syntax for doing this because over the past year, there's been libraries that have gotten released that have realized that this is sort of duplicating some code. A lot of the RESTful controllers start looking alike, so look for ways to simplify that. And now we can do something by rearranging some of the code in here. So we're going to take these respond to items here. We're going to get rid of the extra code. We're going to move those respond to up right under the class definition. And here we're going to specify what our controller can return, HTML, XML, and JSON. Then our controller shrinks a little bit, and then in each of our actions, we can say what they respond to. So we've got respond with users and respond with user for the show method. It's a really nice shortcut, and will make your controllers a little skinnier. Next up, we're going to take a look at ActionMailer. As Yehuda mentioned, this is maintained by Michael Linzar, and he basically was maintaining the T-Mail gem, which he did a complete rewrite on for the mail gem, which is now inside of Rails 3. Let's take a look at the syntax. So if we wanted to create a new user mailer inside Rails 2, this is what we would do from the command line. This would generate a couple files for us, one of which, in our models directory, the usermailer.rb. In Rails 3, using my little alias, we would do rgmailer, same syntax, same thing on the command line. That would create, by default, a mailers directory if we didn't have one, and put our user mailer in there. It's kind of a really neat, new, cool, intelligent default for Rails, so that with Rails 3 applications, you're going to be, generically looking for that mailers folder by default to find where all the mailers are for an application. So if we take a look at, in Rails 2, if we look inside one of our ActionMailer controllers, we would see this, right? So we've got our subject, recipients, from, and body. We're sending a hash into the body to send a mail. in to send that email, we would do usermailer.deliverWelcome. And if you ever took a look under the hood, deliver welcome is basically calling method missing, which figures out which action to call. With Rails 3, things have sort of switched around a bit. ActionMailer has become a lot more like your typical Rails controllers because they're all inheriting from abstract controller. So just like you would declare instance variables in your normal controllers, we declare instance variables which then get sent into our mailers. So we've got a user and a subdomain instance variable, and then we simply call the mail command and send in options in a hash from there. To send the email, now we're doing something we're chaining methods together a little bit better and not using method missing anymore. So we're doing usermailer.welcome, and then we call .deliver to actually deliver the mail. There's also a couple new options which I want to let you guys know about inside usermailer that you can do. Yeah, I know some of you guys just got bumped. Our guys just got bumped too locally. So just connect back up. Hopefully you won't miss too much. Well, a lot of people got bumped. Well, I'll just keep on going. So in the usermailer.
Greg,
yeah?
let's just pause for a minute. We warned people that this would happen, so let's just pause for a minute and give people the chance to log back in, and then we'll we all got disconnected here as well, so if you could hum for a second.
Sure.
Thanks. So go ahead when you see the numbers start to climb on.
When I see the numbers climb.
Okay.
Well, my guys are back in by now, so maybe some other people are too. Should I keep on going? Okay.
Yes, keep on going.
Okay. So there's some new options inside the ActionMailer base which you can use. The first of which is you can specify defaults. So here, in a typical mailer, the from address is usually the same, so I can specify that at the top here right under the class definition. It's also for attachments become a little bit easier. So here I'm specifying a test.pdf which I'm attaching, and you notice here that I'm using rails.root, which is sort of the new syntax for printing out the root path. And you'll also notice that I'm not specifying the MIME type. By default, Rails is actually going to try to figure that out for me, so I don't have to worry about it. Also, if I want to have the mail render out different templates, I can specify a block here with format. Sort of looks like a normal controller, right? So I can specify which views I want to render for the email. But of course, this is totally optional. And by default, for this function, for example, if I had a welcome.text.erb and a welcome.html.erb, that's what would get picked up and sent out. Next up, we're going to be talking about ActiveRelation. This is an external library developed by Nick Callan, which is now replaces the internal ad hoc query generation which ActiveRecord used to have. So let's take a look at a couple examples. In Rails 2, where we would do something like this and use the conditions hash, what this would do when we ran it is it would immediately query the database, and it would return an array of posts that we can immediately start using. In Rails 3, we start using this new syntax where we start chaining methods together. Now this is a little bit different than the first method in Rails 2. This doesn't query the database right away, kind of like you had talked about. It returns an ActiveRelation object. So what happens is it's not going to query the database until we actually start treating this ActiveRelation like it's an array. Let me show you an example. So here we're getting some data, and because we returned a relation, what we can do is say if optionally a user sent in the order they want this data in, we can then add on to that relation and say post.order params order, and then we can do something with it. And it's not until we start treating it like an array or an enumerator that it starts and actually does the query. This technique we call lazy loading because it's lazily loading the data. So this piece of code which I showed you a minute ago, I realized once I wrote it that I could simplify it a little bit. I could write this instead, because if params order is nil, it's simply not going to add that relation. Thus, I could simplify it even more and simply have it on one line. Cool. Next up, for ActiveRelation, let's see. Okay, so the cool part about one thing that you can do with ActiveRelation, because you're building these relations, is let's say that I want to build two different queries, one where I have published and one that I have unpublished. I can start with a single relation because I want both of these to be ordered in the same way, and then I can split that off into two different relations, even after I've created the relation. So one of these is going to be for published and one for unpublished. But of course, this is obviously a bad example because if we're going to be getting published and unpublished posts, we probably want to use named scope, or in this case, scope. So let's go ahead and jump into the model. So in order to create these scopes, in Rails 2, this is what I might do. I could specify a default scope, a default order, and then I could have named scope for published and named scope for unpublished. In Rails 3, this is going to look a little different. Instead of sending in a hash to these items and using conditions, I'm simply going to use the new methods. I've got the order method here and the where method. Things become a little bit cleaner. Now you'll also notice that my named scope became scope. At the moment with Rails 3 beta, if you've got named scopes and you try to run with your named scopes, it's going to give you deprecation notices. The new finder methods, here you can see a list of all the new finder methods inside ActiveRel that you can use. You can chain these all together. To show you one last example before we move on, here's a pretty complex query with lots of hash methods in there. This changes in Rails 3 to look a little bit cleaner. And don't forget, there's a difference here between these two queries. The first one actually fires immediately, and the second one isn't going to fire and go against my database until I start using it. If I want to make it fire right away, I can always say add the all method to the end of it, or like first or last. Each of those methods is going to cause the query to automatically fire and return me an array. Cool. So we've gotten about 2/3 through this presentation, and next up we're going to be talking about ERB strings. So for the previous section, we talked about how now ActiveRecord is using the ActiveRelation library. Now ActionView is also using an external library, using the eRubis library, which is a fast, secure, and very extensible implementation of ERB. It's very flexible, very easy to extend. One of the ways that Rails 3 extends it is by adding some functionality to prevent cross-site scripting. So in case you're not familiar, cross-site scripting is when somebody does something like this, where they're trying to be malicious. They've got JavaScript into your form. They're trying to steal cookies from your users so they can get access to their bank account and hack the Gibsons, all that stuff. So in Rails 2, when we went into our views, by default, things were unsafe. So if I were to put that in my body, my web page, it wouldn't have been safe. With Rails 2, what we did is we always had to remember to input the H tag so that we could clean and make our strings safe to use. So we clean out that so nobody could do cross-site scripting in our sites. And there were so many sites, big sites that took advantage, that failed to this. I mean, even some bigger ones that I'm not going to mention forgot some H tags somewhere in one file, and that caused trouble. So with Rails 3, by default now, all of your variables that you're printing out in ERB are going to be escaped by default. And in order to print out, if you really do want HTML inside what your users, inside what's coming out of your database, you can simply use the raw method. Cool. Now we're going to be talking about adopting unobtrusive JavaScript. But in order to understand how Rails 3 adopts unobtrusive JavaScript, we need to learn a little bit about HTML5. Specifically, the HTML5 custom data attributes. If you look in the HTML5 spec, I don't recommend it. It's not an entertaining read. You'll find that it has these data attributes which are specified just like this as the definition. All that means is you can have attributes inside tags inside your application that have these data attributes, data-anything you can use. And that's for internal use in your application, probably for doing something with JavaScript. The four methods I'm going to be showing you that Rails 3 uses are data remote, data method, data confirm, and data disable with. Now these aren't standards. These are just what Rails 3 is using, and we're hoping maybe there'll be other frameworks that picks up on these, and maybe they become the standard. That would do some interesting things for the JavaScript community. So let's jump into it. In Rails 2, when we have link to remote, no longer is that function available in Rails 3. Oh yeah, so here's the obtrusive JavaScript that this would give us in the page. In Rails 3, we no longer have the link to remote function. Instead, what we do is link to show post remote true. So we add that remote true option, and instead of putting JavaScript inside of our pages, it gives us something that looks like this. So you'll notice here that we have that data tag, data remote equals true. And I'll show you how Rails hooks into that a little bit later. Next up, remote form for. This, of course, gives us more obtrusive JavaScript. In Rails 3, we use form for, and again, send in remote true. This generates for us a form which looks like this, and you'll notice here we have the data remote equals true. In Rails 2, when we want to link to destroy, now this is not Ajax now, this is simply saying that we've got a destroy link with method delete. That, of course, would create a form for us, a post form with a hidden method, with a hidden attribute, called named method with a value of delete. And that would generate, and in Rails 3, we use the same syntax, but now we have data method equals delete. And you'll also notice here something intelligent is happening. We've got rel equals no follow, so that if a Googlebot jumps into here, they're not going to click that link. Next up, we've got a link to destroy, because on destroy links, when people click destroy, you want to confirm that they really want to destroy. So we have a JavaScript confirm in Rails 2. This is the JavaScript. In Rails 3, we use the same syntax for the command, but this is what it would generate. So we've got data confirm equals are you sure, data method equals delete. Next up, and I really didn't know about this until I was doing research here, is that in Rails 2, there is this disable with option here, so that when somebody clicks your button, it will automatically disable the button. And this, of course, creates all this bunch of ugly JavaScript in the middle of your beautiful Rails application. And now when I do this with Rails 3, it gives me this much better HTML, data disable with. Now you'll also notice something really cool about the differences of these two syntaxes. You'll notice with the second one in Rails 3, I'm not telling it what label to use on the button. That's because it now has an intelligent default, so that, I'm trying to click forward with my slide. Hold on. My computer is lagging. Oh, is it my turn to crash? Uh-oh. Not good.
Hey, Greg, while you're recovering here, I wanted to mention that Yehuda has been answering basically all of the questions. So if you run over and you don't get to question time, it's probably okay.
Okay. Okay, so my computer, it looks like it's going down. If you guys could promote, I've got one of my other guys watching the screen. I think you guys can promote Nathaniel Bibler to a participant, and I should be able to control it from his screen to move forward quicker.
Okay, I'll do that right now. Just hang on a sec.
Oh, wait.
B-I-L-E-R.
Oh, wait, hold on. I think, let's see if this works. Oh, wow, hard crash. I was almost done, too. Oh, yeah. Wow, just a hard crash. Yes, please. I'm trying to force quit, too. What is this called? Just go. How do we kill this thing? Oh, here we go. Force quit. There we go. Okay. Okay, I'm reconnecting. Okay, I think I might be back in. Hold on.
So Greg, are you back in now?
Yeah, I think I just logged in.
Okay, for some reason I couldn't promote Nathaniel, but your slides are still up. And again, I want to apologize to everyone for the problems with the Macs and just tell you that we're a little fed up with this too, and we will be switching to another platform soon. I think you'll be very pleased with what you see. So
it looks like I'm in there now as an attendee. If you can promote me again so I can control the presentation.
Sure, I'll do that. Thanks. Hey, Greg. I'm sorry, I can't, my computer is not making you a panelist, but if you'd like, I can advance the slides for you. I know it's awkward, but just say next, and I'll click it through.
Okay. Well,
thanks.
Okay, hold on a second. My guys are trying to connect too. Nobody's seeing slides. Are there other people that are not seeing any slides? I don't see any slides.
That's because when you reconnect, there is some lag time. The slides are still there. They just take a while
I got you. Oh, it's putting up. Okay. I'm back.
Great.
Okay. So, but I can't control the slides anymore. Okay. So I guess go to the next slide. There's so many slides. It's crazy. Right, okay. Next one. Okay, so now you might be asking, how does Rails identify these custom tags and hook into them? Well, if you create a new Rails app, you're going to see that there's this new file called rails.js. And next slide. This is going to get tiring really quick. So this uses the custom data attributes. Next slide. Which we talked about earlier. Next slide. Okay, it's loading. Okay, right. So if we look inside this file, next slide, we're going to see that it has the document object model. It's looking at the object model. Next slide. You can click the next slide again. So it's looking at the click event. And when somebody clicks a file, it's going to look and see if in that for that link that was clicked, if we have a data confirm. If there's data confirm attribute, then it's going to immediately look at a confirm box. Are you sure? Ding. And then we've got, of course, the data remote true if we want to do an AJAX call. So it's doing all this unobtrusively. Next slide. Okay, or to create a form. Ding! Now you're wondering, how do we get jQuery? Yeah, we're almost done here. How do we get jQuery in our app? Ding. So if you look inside the Rails GitHub repo, ding, you will see that there's a rails.js in there. So all you have to do to get jQuery running with your Rails app is to download all your jQuery libraries, put that inside your JavaScript directory, and then download this rails.js, put that in there inside your JavaScript directory, and then it's going to work. It's going to do everything unobtrusively using jQuery. Ding. Cool. And so if you look inside of that file, you'd see something that looks like this. It's using some good jQuery to observe the live events, and then do a confirm box or do an AJAX call unobtrusively. Ding. Ding. Okay, deprecated methods. So these are all the deprecated methods. If you have a Rails 2 app and you try to run Rails 3 on it and you're using any of this stuff, it's going to say these methods do not exist anymore, which can be pretty harsh, especially if you have a pretty significant Rails application. Luckily, what they've done is extracted these into a plugin. Next slide. So if you go to this URL, there's a Rails prototype legacy helper, which will add back all of these beautifully unobtrusive methods to your application so that you don't have to refactor and make your code cleaner. Ding. Cool. So we made it all the way through all my slides, starting a new app, new router, all this stuff. This is all external stuff. I wasn't able to get through, all the new stuff. There's no way in like 30 minutes. Next slide. A couple things that I wish I would have had time for is the bundler, but actually Ryan Bates put out a killer Railscast on this on Monday on the bundler. So if you want to learn about the bundler, I highly recommend you go over to railscast.com and you can watch his screencast. Also, there's this tutorial about generators by David Trasbo, which talks about how now there's a totally new syntax, Thor syntax for using generators. Next slide. Cool. My Creative Commons. Ding. Next slide. Oh, hey, I can control again. Sweet. Now that we're at the last slide, perfect timing. All right, cool. So anyways, I like to put my credentials at the very end of the talk because I can't stand presenters that spend the first 10 minutes talking about themselves. So here's my About Me slide. Working at Envy Labs, I do this little Ruby 5 podcast twice a week. If you want to keep up to date with Ruby news, check out Ruby 5 and let me know. We probably have no time for questions, but Yehuda, I guess, answered all my questions. So if you have any more questions, ask Yehuda, I guess, or something. Thanks.